welcome everybody to this very special Floatation Tank Association roundtable debate, is what I like to call it, based around couples floating. And the question is do you or have you offered couples floating now or in the past, or are you considering offering couples floating in the future? And if you don't offer couples floating and don't consider offering it in the future, why? And if you do offer couples floating, why? Because this is a question that gets brought up just all the time. So, with that said, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. I just had the opportunity to kind of prime this roundtable with Peter Sharp and Elliot Reed and Mandy Rowe from True Rest, and we even have Dr. Roy Vore joining us today. Maybe he'll have something on the microbiology level, possibly, maybe not though. But he always says, "Ask me anything." So that's my ask today, Roy. Um, yeah, anybody else out there, anybody that's joining us right now, if you offer couples floating, please give us your input. Tell us how amazing it is or how beneficial it is for your business. But if you have offered it before, please also tell us why you don't. But most importantly, if you don't offer it and you're like against it, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. And that's kind of why we're here. We're here to have a discussion, and it's been a discussion. Through group forums, the Float Collective, and at Float Conference even, but it's not something that anyone has a real true understanding of yet, I feel like. So I think that this is going to be an interesting, very educational roundtable, and hopefully we can learn something and take something away, and everybody has something to learn and something to give and gain. So
I was gonna say, I know I've talked to other people, and I kind of do it a little bit differently than some people do, especially like with the pricing. I treat it as each is one float credit per person, and I don't offer a discounted rate for a couples float. So my thing is to actually encourage people to really want to float together and not floating together and sharing a tank because hey, let's save $20 and share a tank. So mine is like it's the same price whether you're together or separate. So we always encourage, especially first timers, to float separately. But a lot of people are very codependent or it's a date night or they really want to experience it. But we always recommend the separateness, but we do have that option. But we tell them it's the same price whether you're together or separate. So we want people to really want to float together.
it makes total sense. In fact, I think that I don't offer it yet, but if I was going to do it, there would be no price incentive for booking that specific service. And I think I've basically made my mind up on that from the beginning because I'm trying to filter out the folks that are looking for the price break, if anything. So it's more of a service that we offer. It's just an add-on service, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's got to cost less. It's just like anything else. Um,
Right.
so
And it's like we're a three float tank center and having that couples option, some days, especially this past weekend for Valentine's Day, it was like we had a four float tank center revenue wise. Like we could fill technically four bodies could all be floating at the same time as opposed to typically only three.
yep,
So that's a pretty good bonus that it gives our center for revenue wise.
for sure. So I wanted to, before we actually officially launch this debate, I would like to have a little bit of a debate. So we really got to have somebody on the other side. Drew Kane, unfortunately, he can't make it today. He's having a little bit of trouble, labor trouble at his float center right now, which I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. But he came from an opposite perspective, which I was hoping that, hopefully we could find somebody, but I guess I could come from that perspective if nobody else will. But um, yeah, he's like totally against couples floating and truly thinks that it's something that could cause some, wishy-washy and sketchy business going on inside the tank. So um yeah, I guess.
Jonathan, I'm on that side with you. So if you have a question for me, I can give you true S perspective.
Oh geez. Gosh, okay. So do any of your franchises franchisees, do they have offer couples floating or ever considered it or done it before?
No, none of us do. I've had maybe one or two ask me, but I don't even market it on our website. I pretty much tell them no. They could be doing it behind my back, but for the most part, no.
Yeah,
I tell all of them.
it probably, yeah, you might as well stick with what works, you know. So yeah. Okay,
So we
so
we do
oh, go
we
ahead.
do it in Hong Kong.
Oh, you
Yeah,
do.
we do it in Hong Kong as part of Float Co.
Nice.
Yeah, so we have the Dream Pod Max. So we do couples floats in that. It's becoming more popular. We originally didn't market it. We only really market it now for Valentine's Day. So it's largely word of mouth. And for the pricing, we're pretty similar to a full price walk-in. It's slightly different because we really love doing the right numbers in Chinese context, right? So we just look at things that way. It's almost a full price for a couples float to walk in. And then we might give it something like an extra bag of salt for a couples float as opposed to single float, rather than trying to discount the pricing too much.
Oh, I see.
I don't
So
think it's really,
it's
I
like an
don't think it's really
add-on.
price driven.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also we see it as a good lead-in to get people to float by themselves, because often people will come out and say, "Well, that was interesting, but my husband snored or whatever,"
Yeah.
and then they want to do it separately. So, yeah.
I've
So
got a question because
yeah.
I've never done it. For the people that are offering it, what are the testimonials on the backside of how they enjoyed it?
Okay, I'll go. I've had customers tell me that it was, they use the word an intimate experience. It was a connection. They connected in the tank. I haven't, the only, basically the testimonials that they've written online have all been positive. Just like a great connection. Obviously, the testimonials on the negative side is one partner can't stay still, snores, bumps into them, gets out early, gets salt in their eyes, kind of takes away from it, or they come out saying, "Oh, I loved it, but I'm never floating with them again," or they come out and they say that was the best thing ever. So it's pretty mixed. I'd say more people do enjoy it, but there is that mix of crowd or people who come out and didn't get the full floating experience because there was that other body in the tank with them.
It's interesting too that you mentioned like if they get out and they say something like, "Well, I'll never float with him again," or likely more him than her. It's more of a joke, you would say, like they say it as a joke, but it's probably
Right.
true. Like they really
Yeah.
won't do it with them again because they realize, man, I think that this was really intended to be myself, but then they've learned. So I guess to follow up with Mandy's question, have you seen folks that get out that may have had that kind of feedback come back and experience it as a solo experience?
I have for sure. Sometimes they never come back at all, or they're the couples who are very codependent and they do everything together. Where like she didn't like it or he didn't like it, so I'll probably never do it again, which is very unfortunate. But I know that that does happen.
Oh, for sure.
I see that Kieran is there on the phone. I don't know if you can speak, Kieran. Can you offer some perspective? Kieran's my
Ye-
business partner.
Yeah. So I we put it in. We put the double float pod in about 2 years ago, and yeah, it was a chance to get an extra person in. So instead of having 4 floats, we could have up to 5 people at a time. So I'd say most people who do the couples float afterwards, they're interested to try a single float. Some of our members only try couples floats, like they love doing that. But I think similarly to someone who said it earlier, a lot of people come out saying, especially if they've floated before and they're used to single floats, and then they try a couples float, they say, "No, couples float's not for me," because they like that solo experience. I did that with my wife, actually. I was trying to, just have a different experience, trying to connect. And then she came out afterwards and said, like, we're never doing that again. But I'll never say never, But I think overall it's been very positive to have different size float pods, because it attracts people who might not be interested in a solo experience, and it also attracts people who might be afraid of floating, or afraid of just afraid of that experience. They don't know what it's about. Where there's only a couple of float centers in Hong Kong, so it's not very widely known. So in that way, it has been very positive. We've had people who would try a double float, but then they wouldn't have tried a single float on their own.
Yeah, it's not so much that they're wanting to be intimate, it's that they're wanting the security of a friend. And that's where a lot of people have booked and not even told their partner that they're doing it, and then come along to our float center, and we're spending as much time with that extra person explaining what is a float tank, because they didn't even know. So then they do it, and those people are probably more unlikely to come back. Whereas, as Kieran said, we do have regular people that come, and also the word of mouth is pretty strong. So rather than us doing advertising, we think that within the community, the word does get out about it, and then we do meet new people that way. And sometimes they become regular floaters, sometimes they become members, or one of them might become a member. But I don't know that we have people coming out saying, "Oh my God, that was incredible!" Like both of them saying that at the same time. So we shouldn't look at a couples float as being an enhancement for that as a business model on its own, but as a lead-in to other things, or exploring just flotation therapy. We think it's okay. We would love to have what Elliot has, which is, you mentioned a double shower. We have a single shower in that one room, and so it takes a little bit more time for people to get out, which then can, we've got to think about that with our schedule. So there's other things like that that we would like to improve by having a little more space. So yeah,
That's an excellent perspective, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag. There was two times in the history of my business, Floatlight, where we offered a couples float, and one was to a legit couple, and I think this goes to what Peter you were mentioning. It was a husband and a wife. The wife was just very scared, and it took them getting on the phone with me and explaining the circumstances and saying, "Okay, I'll let you guys do this." But I did it exactly as this was a one-time thing. It's more of an experiment. It was actually like 2 years ago, so it wasn't even recent. But I did it just like Elliot Reed had mentioned. I did not discount the service whatsoever. I charged full price, and they were totally fine with that. They actually did float, and now, believe it or not, they both now came independently of one another, and or at the same time, but chose different tanks. So maybe that one experience in the same tank was necessary for them as an entrance, or a foot in the door, or overcoming the initial objective of floating in the first place. So the other experience that I had was a mom, and it's gonna sound weird, and I swear to you, like it, when I was thinking about it at first, it seemed like, okay, yeah, you want to float with your son. They both wore bathing suits, so it was a mom and a son. The son was like 10 or something, and he was just really entertained or something about it. So that one I actually did offer a discount, but I'll never do that again. I already decided that's not the way to go. I could definitely see that was just them trying to take advantage of the situation, or she was. But in both scenarios, I did have to, obviously double up on the linens, the amenities, and I only have a single stall shower, but it didn't seem like it was too much of a problem. So I guess Elliot, Peter, like when you guys do set up these couples float rooms, what do you all do to make that happen?
My room has double showers, and then we just put 2 towels, 2 earplugs, 2 bath mats. So it is double everything. And when people ask, like, "Oh, why isn't it cheaper?" I tell them, we're using double everything on you. Double the shampoo is used, double the conditioner, double the salt that's out that comes off on each person's body. You know, we keep 2 halos in there, 2 noodles. So they're basically getting everything that a single float would get. They're just sharing the tank. And that's kind of what we tell people. But yeah, our room luckily has the 2 showers, which I couldn't see doing it without the double shower head. I think that would really lag your turnover times. So I think that is one of the things that's essential to having the double floats.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I don't know if I could retroactive. Well, maybe I could, but I think I'm stuck with one. Maybe I only offer couples floats 60 minutes because I do 2-hour blocks. But yeah, I mean, I'm on the side now. I'm getting convinced. Anybody else out there?
We do 60 minutes just on that point for the timing. So we keep it the same, and that's our predominant float time. So we try not to muck up the cycle. We would ask the couples to come in a little bit earlier than a normal floater. So to allow the lead-in time to be better in case there's an explanation for someone that knows nothing about it. As far as the amenities, the extra towel, extra earplugs. So we don't see that as a big deal because we're still relatively charging like a full walk-in price in most cases, right? So it's a full float rather than some discounted float. But it's interesting, we started with the same hypothesis as yourself, thinking that this will be good for children as an introduction, because we don't allow people to float if they're 16 or under. And majority of our people are in their 20s and older. But that didn't turn out to be the case. When we really changed to that double ability to have the double float, we thought that we would attract a lot of like parents with their kid or assisted floating, or even some people with special needs. But that hasn't really occurred. Maybe we just haven't worked out how to market it properly. We did have the same experience with yourself. One child who came in, saw our sign out the front and insisted on bringing his parents down and wanted to know, what is this thing? And he was so excited, and he did come back and float, but didn't really return because he was very excited. And kids, if they're too excited in the tank, is salt water is not great for their for the environment. But yeah, that didn't work out. But I'd like to explore still children's floating, and maybe it's not 2 people floating together, but if it's a environment that allows more space in the room, which that room does have more space as well, physical space, then you could have the parent sitting next to the tank and having a little bit more supervision. And that's our rule. We don't allow anyone to float under 16 without the parent being in the room. So in that sense, we're not seeing it as a wasted float, but as I said, it didn't work out. So it really is primarily for adults.
It's interesting too, because I actually, when I was talking about this child and mother, I came from this at a totally different perspective. I'll just be completely honest. I was looking at it as kind of weird, but you kind of now just explained to me, and it's obvious, like a really good reason why that might have been a good thing for, or a good scenario, like a mother and a child, or a mother or daughter, doesn't really matter, but they're going in with them because they are a child, and having a parent with is just a natural thing. When I initially posted about this roundtable debate, we had a couple people comment on it, and one being Brenda Haynes said, absolutely not. Legally, where do you draw the line for age? 18? We have a lot of vacationers and younger people floating. Do we trust they only float? And she was saying that there's massage clients that do couples massages, and just kind of sketched out. So I was coming more about that perspective, like what is the legitimacy of somebody doing this? So
if I just may, my question is, does anybody here have a couples float practice? Because I'm hearing, I mean, obviously we're the business owners. I understand why that's the perspective we're talking about. But does anybody have a personal float practice?
Nobody.
We offer couples floats at our float center.
I mean, personally, I just mean personally here. We're talking about these different perspectives, and I was just curious if anybody else here, other than from a business perspective of offering them, not offering them, do you personally have opinions on how a couples float practice has impacted your own life?
I have.
I've done it. I don't offer it, but I've done it.
I've done it and I offer it, but I don't enjoy it. I don't utilize it. I didn't care
Okay,
for
because I love it. I have a very strong couples practice, and that I'm not able to offer couples floats. I have a Samadhi and an Oasis, so it's just not really possible. But from my perspective, I've been, and because I've been to a lot of float centers too, I've been the first couples float at a lot of different float centers because I just show up and, you know, you guys let me do things. But I have a little bit of leeway that way. But yeah, I have a really strong practice, and it means something to me. It means something really deep, and more than the towels or the laundry. For me personally, I'm just so honored when I have been able to offer or host those couples floats. And I don't know, I just wanted to hear a little bit more perspective from that direction as well.
Krista, could you speak to your experience a little bit?
Yeah, I actually started floating mainly as a partner float. My first float was by myself, but after that, we have an ocean superior tank, and we floated together. I do float by myself, but mainly I float with David, and it's a very strong float practice. We float very often together, so we do offer floating in our partner floating in our business as well, mainly only to our members. And they all have to float 3 times individually before floating together, so they understand the practice. But I actually have a harder time not floating with David than I do by myself. I am a congenital heart defect patient. I had open heart surgery, and I'm prone to arrhythmias. And I don't know if David joined the call, but he actually takes my arrhythmias on in our float practice. And I can settle down and calm my heart rate, my blood pressure, and everything. When I'm by myself, I cannot do that. So our couples float practice is very, very strong. David also floats by himself a lot too. I only probably do that once or twice a week because partner floating is just that's where my strongest practice is.
Hi everyone. My name's Phoebe. I'm somewhat new to the Float Tank Association. So we have a small place. We actually are called LMA, Mineral Float LMA, Leave Me Alone. I have tried floating with my husband. It's just for us, and I understand the benefit. It's a matter of opinion. I needed to be by myself to get in sync with myself and meditative and whatnot. I could see it working for some people, and that's okay, and that's great. I think it's okay that everyone has their own sense of style. For me, and with our name, obviously, it's all about kind of like finding your me, and that it's okay to say leave me alone. I know my kids used to say that to me all the time, but not in that respect. But it's okay to just kind of have some alone time to kind of get in sync with, who you are, what you need as a person. We have a pod and an Oasis. The pod for my husband and I was small. The slightest ripple kind of like offset me, and then like I think I splashed him accidentally, and that offset him. So again, I think it's great for people that can be united on it, but we don't offer it to our clients. What I do offer for the clients, because they do ask, is I tell them it's just a space issue, but we say meet me in the sauna, and so we do the sauna together, and then we do time alone, and then they can come back together and have some tea, have a snack, whatever. But I mean, every practice is different, and I think there's merits to both. But I think it just depends on what is your unique niche or branding, or what your expectations are. So
I do have a real quick question for you. You said that it wasn't for you. That wasn't your first float, right? Like, correct?
yeah, no, I floated a lot
So
before we decided to open up the business, and I never floated together with him, but I said, hey, let's try. And it's like I accidentally kicked him, and he accidentally splashed me, and then
yeah.
it's easy to move the person. So we were not that deep. We can be about some things, but for us, it was more like a very jovial hour. And he's like, I'm out of here. He's
This-
like, stay yourself, I'm out of here.
So,
So
yeah,
yeah.
let me ask you, if that was your, let's just say, put yourself in the perspective, if that was your first experience, do you
Right.
think you would have done it again?
So if you came in there to be together as a couple, like I know some people offered for Valentine's Day, it might not take on the meditative, those qualities, because if you're like my husband and I, we're always joking around, so you might be kicking the person. So would I try it again? Yes, but maybe separate. So I see floating, and we're partially we're a medical practice, so I see floating as like an extension of if you're stressed, if you don't feel well, if you have back pain, and I find a lot of time it's the person's self-awareness that is not there to like kind of like get that self-awareness by floating and whatever, doing meditation, yoga. So that's sort of like my goal. But again, it could be different for other people, other couples. Some people like to do couples things, and this would be a really good couples things if they had a good time at it and if they felt relaxed together, or if they just sat and laughed for the hour. Hopefully they didn't do anything more than that. But
I
and
like,
I think it's just
yeah,
yeah.
I like Krista's perspective because she said, well, I require three individual floats prior to the couple's
Right.
experience. That
That's a
actually
good
seemed
one.
like a
Right.
good solution potentially to that. Does anyone
Right.
else have any experiences?
Yes, can I jump in? So when I first opened, I took all the information that I heard on the Float Collective about, it was kind of anti-couple floating, right? And I brought it to my customers and I quickly changed direction. So people come float as couples all the time. My tandem is almost always booked on the weekends ahead, even during the week. Tomorrow I have 3 tandem floats. I only have 1 tandem and 4 spots available in a day. So the interesting thing about this is that I have couples that only come and float together. That is their thing, right? I've had couples float together and they be like, nope, not for me. We have a tandem sauna, so some will sauna together, float separately. Um, I used to try to encourage them or direct them in a direction, and what I've come to understand is I don't know what any particular person needs. My job is to set a place up that they can feel safe and comfortable doing whatever it is they need to do for themselves. I have like tips and tricks now that I've accumulated from a couple experiences. And the funniest one, I have to tell you this, the woman came with her husband. She was so excited to get him to float, and he would only do it with her. And that's the other thing. There's people who will come who are so anxious about floating, they will only do it with a partner, right? So they come, she calls me the very next day and she says, do you have an appointment? And I said, yes, I do. She goes, I have to tell you, my husband wouldn't shut up and I feel energetically ripped off and I need a float. And I laughed so hard, I don't think I'll ever forget that. Energetically ripped off. So it's gone really well. I've had people ask me for memberships for tandem floats. And then I have people who are like, yeah, no, I get enough of them during the day. They come float separately. So it's all over the map for me, but I can tell you that my tandem float is almost always pumping.
So I
And
so I gotta ask the question. This is very important
Yeah.
because this is starting to tip the scale a little bit, but there are people that need to have a voice, and I'm going to be their voice, and I'm part of that voice too. I'm going to be direct about this, but do people do anything? Do they do things inside that tank that might not be so savory? Do you know? Do you have a way of knowing
So
that?
a couple things. One, it's 1,200 pounds of Epsom salt. And I remind them of that probably wouldn't feel really good for the woman, right? I don't know that for a fact because I've never done it, but I can't imagine that all that salt would feel good in my privates. So I do let them know that. But I am honestly, the only time I've had anybody act inappropriately was actually in my regroup room. So they weren't even in the float. But I have no way of knowing, but I've never seen any evidence or seen any behavior that makes me think that it was ever misused. And I don't know what anybody else's experience has been.
So Jonathan, if I may jump in right here. So I don't offer the couples floats, and a large reason for that, it's not only the fact that my rooms are set up that I just wouldn't want two people in a room talking. So I don't do that. But also I spend so much time trying to keep my tank water clean. Yeah, we don't know what's going on in the room. But I've heard a bunch of stories of people having sex in the rooms, and they don't have to have sex just in the water. They can have sex in a lot of places in the rooms. And I am not in the business of keeping that place clean so people can come in and have sex in my room. And it's 2022. There's a lot of kinky people out there, and I'm not kink shaming. People are into different things, but having sex in a float room is one of them. And it's happening whether people know it's happening or not. It's absolutely happening. As this was coming up, I know of at least 6 stories from 6 different places that have run into that issue. We don't really know what's going on there, but in the 4 years I've been open, I suspect I've had 3 masturbators in my facility, and I wanted to kill them. It drove me so nuts, and it made me so furious, and I felt so disrespected that I will not put 2 people in a room, and I don't even like 2 people like going to shower in the same room. You're apart for an hour. It's 1 hour. You can do that, or you can go someplace else. It's just my business philosophy. But I've heard stories of condoms in the trash. I've heard stories of other customers hearing people slapping around as they're having a go at it. And I don't want to be in that situation. I don't want my customers to be in that situation. And human nature is human nature. I think that when you put 2 people naked in a room, you catch them at the right time and they bump into each other the wrong way and stuff's going to happen. So it's definitely a thing that I'm concerned with when it comes to cleanliness of my room and of my tank and of my water. And it super bums me out if I see something floating in there and think that that's what I think it is. It really bothers me. So I don't do it. I don't put people in the situation where it's a possibility. And I feel better knowing that my tanks aren't going to have any issues as far as anything being deposited in there that should not be deposited in there.
Yeah. No, this is exactly why I did an open float light. I started off with 2 deluxe cabins. They're big enough. Without a doubt, they're big enough to fit 2 people, but I've been so reluctant up until this point, and maybe even in the future. It is a concern of mine as well, and I'd love to hear from anybody else. You know, what other concerns do you have? Because we have the people here that both object to it and are offering it. What else can we come up with?
We avoided it for about 3 years. Every time we thought about doing it, we would talk ourselves out of it for fear of what would be happening in that room. Last Valentine's Day, we started offering it, and it has been so well received. I have never once felt like there was any funny business going on. Our rooms are pretty well built, so they're pretty soundproofed, but the doors are weak spots. So you walk down the hallway and you can hear a conversation in the room. And there's never been a concern about what's going on in there. We have couples that come back just to do the couples float. I've never had a single problem. Our water always looks great. I never seen anything weird floating in the water. So I don't know if we've just been really lucky, or I just finally took the plunge and things worked out well for me.
You said that go ahead.
Sorry,
Jeremy. No, you go.
I was going to say that's my concern. We have one zero gravity tank like Jen does, and it's right off of our lounge. So part of my concern is just the aesthetic of a couple leaving that room, and if somebody's in the lounge waiting to go into a float, just the idea, because that's gonna put that idea in someone's mind. So that's always been my hesitation, because the rest are pods, and I don't think those are quite big enough for a couples float, but our cabin would be. But that look of that being right off of our lounge is my main concern.
We have the same problem. Ours sits right across the hallway from our lounge, and that was one of the things that always kept us from it. Was it just gives a bad vibe, a bad visual, I guess, a bad connotation. But we're very open with that. This is something that we offer, and it's we try to present it in a loving, romantic, bonding situation. And I've, plus our floats are staggered enough too. I guess you don't have a lot of crossover, but I mean, we have just never had a problem with it. Knock on wood. I mean, shit. Now I'm scared after this conversation. But I mean, I was very reluctant. And like I said, I don't enjoy it. Mark and I have floated together a couple of times before we ever decided to offer it, and it's okay, but it's not something I look forward to. I like my alone time, and so does he. But yeah, never a problem from anybody at our place.
I think for
I'd
us in
like to
Hong
chime in if possible.
Go ahead.
So I'm a little late to the call, so I apologize if any of this has been covered. But it was a last minute decision when we were in our build out for us to start offering couples floats, and it was because my husband and we were in a position during the build out that it was Father's Day. Our son puked the entire day. We went in to go float, and 2 of our rooms were taped off for painting. And even though it was Father's Day, I'm like, either we both float or nobody floats. Like, that's how this is going. It was a rough day. And we found it to be like, we ended up feeling really connected. And that's when we decided to have like a secret menu that we would talk to people before doing a couples float. And our first couples float was actually a pregnant couple. And not only was the mom to be able to hear the baby's heartbeat, but the dad was able to hear the baby's heartbeat. And it was really, really special. But it has taken off so much for us that we have counselors who send their couples to us as part of their counseling homework. So like we found, and I always joke that it's our gateway pod. We have some couples that will only float together, and we have some that are like, that was nice. I know I'm not going to drown now, but we'll float separately next time, So we found really every mix, and surprisingly, mother-daughter floats have been wildly popular, whether it's anxious teenage daughters with ADHD and their mom, or adult daughters with an older mother who needs assistance in and out of the pod. So it's not just couples for us. We have a variety of combinations that do come in.
Yeah, Joanne, we've had a similar experience at our float center, so we haven't had really indications of any problems. Our float center, though, our single pods are kind of in a line along the lobby, but our couples float, the largest pod, actually has a glass window with a magnetic, we frost it, and then it's got a blind behind. But for anyone coming in, they will feel like they're part of the lobby. And I'm sure that the idea of doing something is something that they would think twice or 3 times about. But we don't have any indications of that happening. We did have about a year ago, one guy who we had indications that he was bringing people along as friends too often, but not always in the couples float. That was almost, just didn't feel too comfortable, and our team members didn't feel comfortable. So we dealt with that. But that's the rare occasion. We actually don't have problems that people are describing. And certainly, Drew, we haven't had the problems that you're thinking would happen on a regular basis. No indication of that. So that's been our experience. I think culturally, or depending on your city or town, you also might have a different community atmosphere or the way that people do things. It was great just to hear that a therapist is recommending this as part of their journey of being together. But I think at the end of the day, it is just offering, as we said at the beginning, an additional way to get people into float therapy, because sometimes people just won't come together. So we see that as the big advantage of couple floats.
It is fascinating, and I think that this really is truly a multifaceted debate. There is the one side that talks about the potential cleanliness and the legitimacy of it, and then there's the other side in how it's properly implemented, and meaning like, what does the programming look like? Do you offer this straight out of the gate to everyone, whoever wants it, or is it like, do you offer it after a couple services independently, and then what's the pricing structure of it? And I think we've heard so many amazing points. But does anyone else out there have any other ideas or concerns about this? Because I think this is a really great opportunity to express those. Or does anyone have any real strong, takes on like why we should all do it? Like I think there is an accessibility to it. Mandy, you said that you've done the couples float experience before, and I wanted to kind of address that before. Would you do it again if put yourself in that position? Would you do it again if that was your first float?
If it was my first float, no, I wouldn't. Would I do it again on a regular basis? It, I think it was more of a bonding that he enjoyed than I enjoyed. I think personally, I would do it alone, but when I, had a boyfriend and we floated a few times together, he really felt really close, and I think that was mainly because I also run a float spa business, so he was, thinking that he was in my element with me. But no, I much prefer to go alone.
For sure. And go ahead, Jody.
Can I
Yeah,
chime in for a
go
moment?
ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I was late to the call too, but we have a thriving couples float. I have 2 enclosed escape pods, and then I have one of the open float away rounds. And I have had a ton of couples that have come in for their first float and then said, well, he snored. I prefer to float by myself the next time. But so their first experience was really great together. I don't have a lot of couples that continue to do it, but we definitely cater to couples. We've never had any troubles with challenges that we know of, but I have great front desk staff that's not afraid to say there's no fornication, no masturbation by yourself or with others, and really just looks everybody in the eyes and lets them know you will be responsible for $1,300 if any of this happens. And I think with just talking that way, we've not had any problems. And I encourage it because and I have had, like the other lady that had talked about, I've had quite a few parents floating with their kids, especially a lot with ADHD and very high stressed, like 13-year-olds specifically. And I've had really great results. So I would hope that it might not be in your demographic, maybe the greatest draw, but it's definitely a population that can be reached.
So when people do couples floating, and let's say, this is the biggest thing that I usually hear, like, at least when I ask folks, like, well, I could hear my partner snoring, or they kicked me, or I got salt in my eyes. When folks do get out of the tank and they have kind of a not so pleasant experience, do you honestly see them coming back? Do they come back?
Absolutely. And I have a lot of them that convert to memberships.
So when they come back, what do? Do they go solo then?
Separate. Yeah.
Well, of course, yeah, separate. Naturally, right? So very strong argument. It's really hard to argue that. It's just, I guess the biggest point is how do you know? How? Like, you say that you know that these folks are not doing anything inside of that tank, but we know that there are guests out there, and you know what this looks like if you've had a float center for a while, where they're doing something inside the tank, like masturbation, and that's one of the worst things that you could experience. I do agree with Greg on that perspective, but that's the question. Is it based on trust? Do you have like a front desk? Is your staff trained on like what to look for? At least, like, is it two young people and they're like lovey-dovey, like, oh, we're gonna go to the champagne room. Are you really gonna let them get in that tank for real? Question.
I think the people who are going to, we'll say, disrespect your space are going to disrespect your space whether they have someone with them or not. Mm-hmm. And really, you have to look at all of the precautions that you have in place for single floaters, and just use that same sort of approach, whenever you have two people. I love what Jody was saying about just being straightforward, remind them, and that you are responsible for any damages. You are responsible for anything that is left in the tank. And that you can just say, we know, plain and simple. And whether or not you really do, they don't know that. People don't know what we are able to test for and what we're not able to test for. But I think just straight out saying no, you might be missing some great opportunities. You might also be, missing out on those chances just for someone to have an experience that they wouldn't have had they not come in with someone and felt a little safer in that aspect. Personally, I've only floated once with my husband, and we had already floated individually several times, and we traveled to Murfreesboro to go to Float Alchemy. And we were honestly going in expecting to hate it. That we both enjoy, especially me, I enjoy my float by myself. And we actually found this really amazing just sense of synergy and stillness that neither of us disturbed the other. We actually didn't move at all that we were aware of, and just had a really amazing time kind of letting go. And it was especially while we were still under construction, and had a really great time together to be able to just feel that sense of like stillness and peace together, and to have that, share that with him was really amazing. And we're actually considering adding a couple's tank. If we have a second location, then that's something that we would consider doing. So, and just probably one, but I think it does invite a deeper level connection. I kind of like the idea of having people float a couple of times themselves, but if not, you at least have that conversation with them up front and say, you might get distracted, you might disturb each other. Just know that about the experience, that it might not be what you're expecting, but you have to be really respectful and intentional of how you are together in this space. I think having those conversations with people that's an important piece of it. If you're just getting them in the door and throwing them into the tank, you're probably going to have some pretty unhappy people, so set those expectations.
So I'm going to jump in and say devil's advocate. I think that one reason, and I think this is human nature, especially as a business owner, one reason why there might be that other side so strongly opposed might have to do, and you were honest about it, Kim. I think what you said is you don't offer couples floating because you don't have the capability of doing it yet, but you'd like to in the future. But like, there are some folks out there that are like, well, my only choice is to say, well, we don't offer it, so we're going to speak against it because we can't compete with the next float center that might be hundreds of miles from us that doesn't offer it. So that's our first intent and perspective coming at this. But I think that maybe what you're suggesting is that we consider opening up the potential for that. When new float centers get built, maybe they do consider building bigger, more accommodating suites, because this is a greater opportunity for accessibility for folks that would never do it otherwise. And maybe that's good for the industry. So excellent points for sure. Yeah.
But I do think that Kim raised a great point, as several others have as well. The way that we interact with people, talk with people, remind them of the waiver or the conditions, but also the way that we take that couple into the room and talk to them about the magical event that they're about to do, if they've not floated before, is also our responsibility to get them onto the float journey. And if you don't do that, if you just say, there's the door, have a good float, then I think we've not really taken that opportunity as well as we can. And I think by giving that environment and having the right demeanor of the interaction from us with that couple sets them on the journey to do the right thing, and then decide whether they like couple floating or want to float separately. But at least it opens the door. So I think setting that expectation is part of what all of us should be thinking about, as if we do decide to offer couples floats, that it's not just open the room and sell it at that price. You've got to have the narrative, you've got to have all of those things to make it successful in your business and not be a liability.
I think that's why we offer it for our members specifically, because they do understand the float and they respect the float before going into a partner's float. So it's that narrative of understanding what you're getting into.
It's a really interesting idea to make it members only. It's a value add, it's a benefit to the member, but it also increases the likelihood that they've experienced floating on their own at least several times. So it's a really unique concept. I'm going to noodle on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really
It seems
good
to work.
concept. Yeah.
We do get a little bit of pushback sometimes for people who just want to float like on Valentine's Day but when we explain the float and the concept of the float, usually people are like, we get it. Okay. So yeah, just something to think about, a different perspective.
I did have a question for all those out there that do offer the couples floating. Do you ever in your intakes, because I mirror what Peter say, we spend, when I say we spend about 15 minutes walking them through explaining every single thing about this tank and the amenities and everything, and that's what works. But if I was to say, let me offering couples floating, would I try to like maybe slip something in there that's like a potential like secret deterrent or something? Or do you guys do anything like that? I know it sounds really abstract and weird for me to say that, but like, like you wouldn't want to do it anyway. So, cause you're going to burn or all your orifices will burn like somewhere, just something weird like that. Or is it something that you just don't bring up because you're that trusting of people?
So we include that in our walkthrough. We do an in-depth walkthrough as well, and when we are introducing the couples float experience, we tell them it's intimate without being intimate. Like sharing that space with no expectations. Like there's something special about that. But when we do our walkthrough, every time I tell them, look, there is nothing sexy about 1,000 pounds of salt, and everything floats. So unless you want this to turn into a $1,500 date night, don't. And we get a laugh, but we have a non-traditional building that we're in. We're in a 130-year-old mill building. So when people come in, they feel like they're a guest in our home. And so I think that really helps us because we're a closer knit community. And I think that is a benefit for us.
I'm coming to your float center, dude. Sounds amazing. I have to say.
Driving distance from Portland.
Wow, it makes sense. Like you're basically prepping them. Like, yeah, there's nothing sexy about 1,000 pounds of salt. It just gets them in. Like, okay, it's time to meditate. No sexy time in that tank.
Yep, it works.
Cool. So, anybody else have any thoughts? The floor is open.
On that point, when we have new people in, couples or
we lost you. Is it Siren?
Yeah, Kieran.
Yeah,
oh,
Kieran here. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah. I got you. Okay. We got you.
So yeah, we try not to. Sorry, one second. Yeah. When people come in for a couples float or a single float, we try to keep everything in a positive sense. So we try not to say, don't pee in the pod or don't do this. It's always, telling them what they can do and telling them what they can get out of it. So that introduction is more about finding out why they came, what interests them, like asking them questions, and then we can tailor our answers to give them the message, but we're very careful not to be telling them what not to do, and not to be bossy, I suppose, because I wouldn't like that myself if I went somewhere and they just kept telling me in that way. So we don't really address if couples are going in, we don't say anything about sex or anything about like what they can or can't do, but we would keep an eye out or keep an ear out for what is going on. Like Peter mentioned earlier, it's right off our lobby, with a glass window where people, when they come into the center, they see into the couples pod room. So maybe in that way, it's an advantage where they don't feel like they have, it's their own home and they can make as much noise as they want. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about it. But I do want to say thank you to everybody for their input today. This has been really good, and we've got some good ideas about how to, like, things that we can implement here in Hong Kong.
Oh, without a doubt. This has been so wonderful. I can't believe it. Like, this was set up as a debate, so we're supposed to come from both angles, but if anybody else, I think that there's a strong argument on both sides, but it seems to me like maybe couples floating might be something that is worth potentially implementing, but for those who can't or haven't done it yet, it's not a big deal if you can. Get people in the tank no matter what. Like, that's the point. Like, whatever it takes, whether it's a single or a couple.
I think there's one other thing with the fear of what happens in the room. For us, whether it's a single float or a couples float, we always go in and check the tank and the room prior to even starting our filters. So we're able to see and pull the people or person in before anything happens, like filtration wise. So I think that's something to also think about, is just making sure that there is nothing floating, because that's how we know that our waters have been respected, or as if the next person was floating. So something else to think about.
I wanted to also get a quick poll before we end the live stream of those who do offer couples floating, what the tank that you actually have and what your experience is with that tank, just to kind of, get a little bit of idea of what equipment folks are using for these couples experiences. Yeah, go ahead if anybody has any input on that.
I have the Octafloat from Floataway, and I'd like to get another couple size one, probably from Superior, is my next thought. And I've had no troubles.
We have the Wave manufacturer. It's 8 feet by 6 feet, so it's plenty big. And even for one person, sometimes customers say it's too big. If it's a small person, they say they get lost in that tank. So it's plenty big for 2 people.
We have a zero tank, same size, 6 by 8. It's huge, even for one person, so people fit fine.
We have the Superior Deluxe.
That's what I have, and I imagine it'd be
been
perfect for 2 people, no problem.
We have the DreamPod VMAX, which we have several couples where the husband is 6'6" and they're able to float easily in there. But admittedly, we have some couples that float with their head at the same end, and we have some that go head to feet. It's really personal preference.
We have the same as yourself, Joanna, the VMAX from DreamPod.
Interesting. I've never seen this one before. It's an actual pod?
Yeah, and it's about the size of a queen size bed.
Yeah, it's the biggest pod that they make, and it really is physically looking the same as the Sport and the V2, but it's much larger. And at the bottom, it's almost like a square shape at the bottom. That's the difference of the VMAX compared to the others. Not as rounded.
Yeah,
but
nice for shoulder space.
The top is just as rounded, so it's still great for taking photographs and everything.
Excellent. And then one other question too, like, and I thought that this was actually quite brilliant. I think it was Krista. It was how you framed couples floating. You didn't actually use the term couples floating. You called it partner floating, and I felt like you specifically did that intentionally. Could you speak about that a little bit?
So my background is I'm a behaviorist in psychology, so neurolinguistics are really important to me. So that's what we have put into our float center, is because a couples float can kind of have a connotation of something more romantic, but a partner's float can be with a child. We have a lot of children that have floated with us. Being a behaviorist, I work with the population that's labeled in crisis. And so when we say you can partner float with your child, it takes away that what I want to call, and like the weirdness of what you were talking about earlier when you were like, well, it was the son and mom. It takes away that weirdness because it's just a partner float now. It's not a couples float.
I immediately gathered that when you mentioned it too. I said, wow, that was just brilliant, because couples float, it automatically took away all of that worry. That's the reason I brought this up, and it stayed with me till now. So genius term right there, I must say.
Thanks. Neurolinguistics is just a beautiful thing. The way that the narrative, we can shape and frame things within our wellness centers just by the words we use. It's pretty awesome.
And not to take away from anyone's couples float marketing, but like, I think that the partners float is that, maybe that's really what we should be talking about, like how we frame it. And that will help solve a lot of issues. Because if we frame it differently, then, maybe, well, I don't want to go there. I'm not going to go there with any particular setting with floats. But you guys probably think what you were thinking I'm thinking, but maybe not. Anyone else have anything else? Comments? We're about an hour in. Man, this is going to be one heck of an archived roundtable debate. I think for many years, people will be watching this and saying, well, this was probably one of the deciding factors for whether or not I build a couples float at my float center. So thank you guys, all of you, for participating today. What an amazing conversation. I can't wait to meet with the rest of the board for the FTA and the Outreach and Education Committee, because we're going to have a celebration about how amazing participation was. And thank you guys for just joining us. I really hope that you all have just a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next roundtable, which will be the Consultants Roundtable. That'll be another public roundtable, so you don't have to be a member. But the Consultants Roundtable is going to be a great opportunity to learn who has the on-point marketing in our industry, like who's providing the best wholesome marketing, and oftentimes for free. You guys know some of them, and we'd love for you to join us for that roundtable, which is going to be coming up here in the next few weeks. Check your emails. Look out for the post on that. But with that, I think we're out. Thank you all again, friends. Have a wonderful evening. Bye now.